Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This government has created a part-time parliament by scheduling just 10 sitting days in 8 months. Why is the Prime Minister stopping the parliament for sitting for more days, which will prevent the parliament from legislating the recommendations of the Banking Royal Commission before the election? And after voting against the Banking Royal Commission no less than 26 times, why is the Prime Minister insisting on another delay?
Treasurer, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the tone changed pretty quick there, didn't it? Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for the question. The question, Mr Speaker, goes to the matters that the government is dealing with in this parliament. And the next big thing that the government is doing is handing down a surplus budget on the 2nd of April. The budget has been brought forward to the 2nd of April, and in the normal course of events, this is the sitting schedule that enables the budget to be prepared on that day. And so the government will hand down the first surplus budget by any government in 12 years, Mr Speaker. That's what we're doing. That's what we're working on, restoring the budget to balance, a budget that was left in tatters by the Labor Party the last time they had the opportunity to manage the Treasury benches. But, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about the recommendations of the Royal Commission. And, Mr Speaker, it has now been 7 days, 8 days, 8 days, and we are still waiting for a response to the Royal Commission from the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. What
Members
we have
on both
from
sides.
the Leader of the Opposition and the Labor Party is an in-principle response. Are we going to have an in-principle budget from the Labor Party if they're ever elected?
Members for
Are we
Gordon.
going to have in-principle border protection, Mr Speaker? Are we going to have in-principle budgets in the future, Mr Speaker? No, Mr Speaker. They have carped about this issue, but when it comes to actually providing a response themselves, they are yet to do so. They are yet to provide that response. Now, Mr Speaker, our full response means that we are taking action on all 76 recommendations, and indeed, Mr Speaker, there is legislation that the opposition can support even now in this chamber and in the other chamber to take action on those measures. When we introduced the Banking Executive and Accountability Regime, when we introduced the bank levy, who dragged their feet in supporting those bills, Mr Speaker? The Labor Party. The Labor Party on both bills whinged and carped and complained and delayed and stalled. And, Mr Speaker, after dragging them to the table, they eventually voted for it, Mr Speaker, and claimed it was bipartisanship. But this is always the way with the Labor Party. Whether it's on important matters of economic security or national security, you have to drag them to the table, Mr Speaker. Now, I also make the point that there are 40 recommendations that require legislation. As the Law Council has said, you don't go and do that in some sort of pre-election frenzy, Mr Speaker. What you do is you calmly and carefully prepare that legislation, you consult on it to ensure there are no unintended consequences, and you do it as a responsible and rational government. The Leader of the Labor Party will take a reckless approach to our economy, and his response on this matter determines that.
The member for Isaacs will cease interjecting, and the member for Dunkley has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House the government's plan for a strong economy and a secure future, and what this means for all Australians, including people living in my electorate of Dunkley? Why is the government determined to stick to its plan?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Dunkley for his question. And, Mr Speaker, we do have such a plan, and it's a plan we have been implementing since we were first elected 5.5 years ago, which I upgraded and released just 2 weeks ago, and I tabled that economic plan for a stronger economy and a secure future, Mr Speaker. That is our plan that is building an even stronger Australia, both now and in the future. It is the plan that has delivered already more than 1 million jobs ahead of the 5-year promise that we took to the election back in 2013. It is the plan that has already delivered lower taxes for some 10 million taxpayers around the country. It is the plan that has delivered lower taxes for 3.3 million small businesses employing 7 million Australians. It is the plan that has delivered the lowest level of welfare dependency of the working age population in more than 30 years, Mr Speaker. It is the plan that has delivered the highest level of employment around the prime age working population that we have seen in economic record, Mr Speaker. It is the plan that is delivering the essential services that Australians rely on, because it is only from a stronger economy that you can deliver those essential services that Australians rely on. Some $37.6 billion in schools funding, an average of a 62% increase in funding per student, a $5.7 billion fund and support for drought relief, as the Minister for Agriculture has been driving forward, record funding for both Medicare, going from $25 to $29 billion, and the highest bulk billing rates we have seen, with bulk billing at record levels, Mr Speaker. We have seen a fully funded NDIS, 1,900 new medicines. All of this, Mr Speaker, is funded by a stronger economy and a government that knows how to manage the budget. Now, that is what we've been delivering. That's what our economic plan is about. It's about having a stronger economy. Now, there are alternative plans, and they are the alternative plans of the Leader of the Labor Party, who wants to take $200 billion and higher taxes, the biggest tax wet blanket, and throw it across the economy, and he thinks it'll have no difference. He thinks it'll make no difference. Taxing the economy, Mr Speaker, out of existence is the plan of the Leader of the Labor Party. Now, our plan is to make our economy stronger, and that's why our plan will generate 1.25 million new jobs over the next 5 years. And we have the record to demonstrate that we have generated those jobs. Jobs for younger people, the greatest period of jobs growth for young people that this country has seen an economic record. Jobs growth for older Australians above age 55. Jobs growth for women, as we've seen record participation levels for women, over 650,000 jobs created for women. Our economic plan is creating a stronger Australia. Labor's plans will create a weaker Australia.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has apologised for not calling the Banking Royal Commission earlier. Can the now Prime Minister confirm media reports that he was, in fact, the reason for the delay? And will the Prime Minister now say sorry for delaying the Banking Royal Commission by voting against it 26 times?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer the member to my comments last year on this matter, where I made it very plain my regret on not having called the Royal Commission sooner, but I reminded the member that I'm the Treasurer at the time who did call the Royal Commission, Mr Speaker. And I'm the Prime Minister
on both sides
who has received the report of that Royal Commission, and I'm the Prime Minister who is acting on the recommendations of the Royal Commission. I am the Prime Minister who was, when Treasurer, introduced the Banking Executive Accountability Regime. I am the Prime Minister who is the Treasurer, who was with the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services, who introduced the Australian Financial Complaints Authority and increased funding for ASIC to ensure that they had the powers and had the penalties and had the resources to do the job, Mr Speaker.
Member for Greenway.
Now, when the Leader of the Labor Party was the Minister for Financial Services, what did he do? Did he call a Royal Commission? As Leader of the Opposition, did he even draft a terms of reference for a Royal Commission? No, Mr Speaker. When it comes to financial services, the Leader of the Opposition sees people's problems as only a prop for political opportunism.
The member for Brisbane.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on the government's plans for... I'll start again. Will the Treasurer update the House on how our government's backing small business across Australia to get ahead, including in my electorate of Brisbane? And is the Treasurer aware of any different approaches that would damage the economy and hurt enterprising small businesses?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Brisbane for his question, because we all know on this side of the House that he's fighting hard for the more than 20,000 small businesses in his electorate, Mr Speaker. And I had the great pleasure to join the member in his electorate at Clayfield Seafood Market with owner Nick, and to hear firsthand how he has been one of the more than 300,000 small businesses that has taken advantage of the government's instant asset write-off, Mr Speaker. And my message to Nick and to the more than 3 million small businesses across the country, that not only is the government continuing with the instant asset write-off, Mr Speaker, but the coalition is expanding it, Mr Speaker. And we are expanding it from $20,000 to $25,000, Mr Speaker. And this will enable a coffee shop to be able to get a new coffee machine, Mr Speaker. This will enable a baker to get a new oven, Mr Speaker. This will enable a courier to get a new vehicle, Mr Speaker, because we are backing small business. And this is one of many measures that we on this side of the House have taken to back the engine room of the economy, Australia's small businesses, Mr Speaker, including ensuring that the Commonwealth Government is paying businesses on time, that we are a model payer and that we are inspiring other companies around the country, Mr Speaker. So 97% of contracts under $1 million are being paid within 30 days by the Commonwealth. But now we are looking to ensure that under $1 million, the contracts are paid within 20 days, Mr Speaker, because we don't want small business to be a bank for big business, Mr Speaker. And we are ensuring that red tape is being cut. $6 billion of red tape is being cut. A $2 billion securitisation fund to ensure more competition, more liquidity, more finance for small businesses. And of course, tax cuts, Mr Speaker. We have delivered more than 3 million small businesses a tax cut, Mr Speaker. Those opposite had to be brought kicking and screaming to support the tax cuts, Mr Speaker. Now I'm asked, am I aware of any alternative approaches and risks to small business, Mr Speaker? And we know that those opposite are planning a $17 billion hit on 300,000 small businesses, including the discretionary trust, Mr Speaker. These are family businesses that are going to be hit by the Labor Party as part of their $200 billion of new taxes, Mr Speaker. Nobody is safe from the Labor Party and their plan for higher taxes on small business.
The member for Grayndler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that in a candid interview earlier this week, the Minister for Defence was reported to have said, and I quote, "Malcolm is Aslan to me." Noting that the pathway to Narnia is through the Cabinet, will the Prime Minister finally tell the Australian people, including the Minister for Defence, why his beloved Aslan, Malcolm Turnbull, is no longer the Prime Minister of Australia?
That question is out of order and the member for Grayndler knows it. It's the independence question. The member for Kennedy.
PM, the Midwestern Gulf is 1/10 of the entire cattle industry, our fourth biggest exporter. It is now decimated by droughts, flooding and the resulting terminal health conditions. With no stock, massive existing debt and hundreds of thousands of rotting carcasses to clean up, farmers will have no capacity to pay their mortgage, let alone restore and restock. Will the government commit to a reconstruction authority, cutting existing debt by 30%, providing finance at government interest rates? Surely, PM, without this minimal action, North Queensland's calamity, its misery, its human and economic hardship will worsen exponentially.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Kennedy for his question, and I welcome his remarks earlier in the debate when he spoke of the impact of the floods on Western Queensland. We have already committed, and the Minister for Agriculture, as we speak, is pulling together a recovery and restructuring and a plan for northwestern Queensland. I have had now 2 hookups with all, as you know, of the mayors across those districts. And that was one of the first things that was raised in those meetings, is what is the plan to get the cattle industry in north-western Queensland back on its feet. Now, there are many options that will be considered as that plan is being brought together. And I was talking to one of the mayors this morning, getting the data in, getting the impact in, understanding on everything from the impacts on the rail link that goes from Cloncurry right across that entire region, and that could be basically out of order for a very, very long period of time, potentially years, or certainly the next 6 to 12 months. There is a large number of things that will need to be done in north-western Queensland. But significantly about those challenges is the restoration of the Queensland cattle industry. Now, this isn't about trying to prop up an industry that doesn't have a future. This is an industry, as you were remarking before, which has a massive future for Australia. And we need to be there to support them rebuild that cattle industry in North Queensland. And what I'm undertaking to you today and to this House and to the people of North Queensland is the plan that will come forward from the Minister for Agriculture will address these issues. Now, whether it is the specific recommendation that you're making, they are things that we will put everything on the table to consider. But the one thing that we will do is ensure that there is a recovery and a restoration plan for the North Queensland cattle farmers to be able to return to the prosperity which we know is ahead, and we'll be there to do that in partnership with them. One of the important things that has been inherited in our response to this is to work just so closely with those local communities, and they are feeding back through those mayors right now. There's a meeting on, I think, tomorrow, where they are going through the recommendations that they will be putting to us in terms of the plan coming forward. So I welcome all the suggestions, because I think we are joined together in the great task of ensuring that that cattle industry will be as great as it was always going to be in the future, if not even greater.
The member for Fisher.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government's strong economic management is bringing the budget back into surplus and making it possible to pay back Labor's debt? Is the Treasurer aware of higher taxing alternatives?
The Treasurer has to call members on my left.
Cocky and arrogant.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Fisher for his question, and he knows on this side of the House we are presiding over a strong Australian economy, Mr Speaker. When we came to government, economic growth was 2.1%, Mr Speaker. Today it's 2.8%, Mr Speaker. When we came to government, unemployment was 5.7%, Mr Speaker. Today it is 5%, the lowest level in 7 years, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House have created more than 1.2 million new jobs, Mr Speaker. And for those aged between 25 and 54, we are seeing the greatest proportion of that cohort in employment on record, Mr Speaker, over 80%. And for younger people aged 15 to 24, over the last financial year, over 100,000 got a new job. That was the greatest number, the highest number on record, Mr Speaker. And 200,000 Australian women found employment in 2017-2018, which was the highest number in 30 years, Mr Speaker. So not only are we creating jobs and growing the economy, but this year, when we deliver a budget on April the 2nd, it will be a budget surplus, Mr Speaker, and the first surplus in over a decade. And the benefit of having a strong economy is that you can spend more money on hospitals, more money on schools, list more drugs on the PBS, a record spending $75 billion on infrastructure, including congestion-busting infrastructure, Mr Speaker. And when we deliver a surplus, and surpluses in the years ahead, we will be paying back Labor's debt, Mr Speaker, because the Labor Party left us $240 billion in accumulated deficits. And when the Labor Party was last in office, debt was growing by a remarkable 30% plus a year, Mr Speaker. That was the Labor Party's record. And now what is the risk? What is the risk to the Australian economy? It's coming from $200 billion of higher taxes from those opposite. Taxes on your business, taxes on your income, taxes on your savings, taxes on your property and taxes on your electricity bill, Mr Speaker. And the hitting of 900,000 plus retirees and people planning for retirement and 200,000 self-managed super funds. And the member for McMahon, with his sheer arrogance, says to those people, if you don't like our policy, don't vote for us, Mr Speaker. The sheer arrogance of the member for McMahon. And the Leader of the Opposition was afraid to stand up for him, afraid to defend the member for McMahon. How long will it be before he abandons him and his disastrous retiree tax?
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister voted against the Banking Royal Commission 26 times, tried to give the big banks a $17 billion handout and is now delaying action on the Banking Royal Commission until after the election. Isn't it the case that this Prime Minister just can't be trusted when it comes to the banks because he's only ever interested in looking after the top end of town?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. There's only one side of politics in this side of the House that is getting on with taking action of the 76 recommendations, Mr Speaker. It's we on this side of the House taking action on the 76 recommendations. And those opposite, who are demanding that the report be put out immediately, demanding that they see the report so that they can immediately respond to it, have had the report now for 8 days and there is no response, Mr Speaker. Let me read to you what the member for Hotham said 8 days ago. The member for Hotham said, we will implement every single recommendation that's in the Royal Commission's report. Well, where is the response? Where is the response? Where is the response?
Members on the left.
Let's say if the Labor Party abandons 26,000 Australians working with mortgage brokers, Mr Speaker. Let's see if the Labor Party ignores the recommendations of the Productivity Commission and what they said that if you got rid of the fee model for mortgage brokers, what that would mean for competition, Mr Speaker. At the end of the day, we on this side of the House have taken a responsible, cautious approach, and we are taking action on all 76 recommendations. But what is more, Commissioner Hayne has endorsed the work of the now Prime Minister and then Treasurer in bringing in place the Banking Executive Accountability Regime by saying not only should it be enforced within banks, but it should be extended to insurance and superannuation funds as well, Mr Speaker. And the work that we have done in relation to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, because that policy that's been put in place, and I commend the member for Higgins and now Prime Minister for the work that they did now, is providing an opportunity for people to be heard. And we're even going further than the Hayne Royal Commission, ensuring we put in place a compensation scheme of last resort, and that for the next 12 months, AFCA will be able to hear the concerns of misconduct by people going back a decade, Mr Speaker, not just the current 6 years which is currently in place. And we have legislation before this parliament that the Labor Party can support, which will ensure that directors of superannuation funds will face a civil penalty. And we will also be amending this legislation to include the Hayne Royal Commission recommendation that trustees of super funds will also face those civil penalties. So if the Labor Party wants to get on and implement the Hayne Royal Commission, they should get on and support our legislation that is currently before the parliament.
That's right. The member for Forrest has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Jobs, Industrial Relations and Women. Will the minister update the House on how the government's economic plan is helping to get more Australians, including more women, into the workforce? How does this compare with different approaches?
The Minister for Jobs, Industrial Relations and Women.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Forrest for her question. And she must be one of the hardest working members in this place, and I congratulate her on being the very first female government whip in this place, and what a fantastic job that she does. Like the rest of this side of the chamber, she knows how important it is to give all Australians the opportunity to be able to get a job, to enter the workforce and to be able to secure their financial future. Because she understands that a job does just that. It helps to build the financial security for yourself and for your families, and it gives people and families more choices about their lives. Mr Speaker, we are delivering, as a government, through our economic plan, the ability to create those jobs through lower taxes and more investment. We have in fact delivered, under our economic stewardship, more than 1.2 million new jobs in this country, which means that we have more Australians in work than ever before. This is a record. And as Minister for Women, I'm particularly pleased that the majority of those 1.2 million new jobs are in fact held by women. In fact, we are at an all-time high when you consider the number of women who are in work now. Almost 6 million women in work right now, which is a record. And they are enjoying the financial benefits of being able to get and keep a job. In fact, when you compare us to those opposite, there are 700,000 more women in the workforce compared to when Labor left office. And there are more women in full-time work, which is now standing at a record high, with around 400,000 more women in full-time jobs compared to when Labor left office. So the contrast couldn't be clearer. Under our government, there are more people in work than ever before and more women in work than ever before. Under those opposite, there will be less people employed. And, Mr Speaker, we can't help but also point out the fact that when people earn a wage, 9.5% of that wage goes to people's retirement savings. And we as a government have been delivering. We've been delivering for all Australians, but particularly for women. We're the ones who delivered the low-income superannuation tax offset, which helps women, particularly low-income women, benefiting around 1.9 million Australian women to the tune of $500 million each and every year. We're giving flexibility measures, catch-up contribution, concessional contributions, levelling the playing field. These are things that the Leader of the Opposition would scrap if he was given the opportunity to govern, and he would also impose a mega retiree tax that would hurt Australian women.
The member for Hotham.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and every member of his government voted against the Banking Royal Commission not once, not twice, but 26 times. Why did the Prime Minister vote against the Banking Royal Commission 26 times? Why did he ignore the victim of the banks to protect the top end of town? And, Prime Minister, why can't you just say you're sorry?
The Treasurer, Mr Cole.
Mr Speaker, the question is the Leader of the Opposition sorry for 10,000 victims of Trio, Mr Speaker? Is the Leader of the Opposition sorry for what happened to the Storm Financial victims and the Opus Prime victims? The reality is we on this side of the House have provided a comprehensive response to the Hayne Royal Commission. We are taking action on 76 recommendations. We are putting in place greater protections for Australian consumers. We are putting in place greater accountability mechanisms for the financial system, Mr Speaker. We are ensuring that our regulators are fit for purpose. Regulators that the Leader of the Opposition, when he was the Financial Services Minister, said were the best in the world, Mr Speaker. And we are also taking action to ensure that people get redress, an opportunity to be heard and compensation where they have suffered misconduct, Mr Speaker. There's a clear contrast. Those opposite are playing politics. We're getting on with taking action, Mr Speaker. We are getting on with ensuring that the financial system will put the interests of consumers first. We understand the misconduct that has occurred, which has been documented in detail by the Hayne Royal Commission. Broken businesses and broken lives. Profits put before people, Mr Speaker. Greed that led to those outcomes. And that is why we are taking action on all 76 recommendations. As for the Labor Party, I don't know what they're waiting for. I don't know who they're trying to appease, but they haven't produced, with double the amount of time to consider the Royal Commission, they haven't even produced their response.
The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how a strong economy enables the government to deliver the infrastructure that regional Australia relies on? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any risk to our regions from different approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Flynn for his question. It's a good one, Mr Speaker. The Liberals and Nationals believe in building dams, Mr Speaker, and certainly with the summer that we are experiencing at the moment, Mr Speaker, with the excess of water in the north of Queensland, Mr Speaker, those devastating floods contrasted very starkly with the dry areas of the Murray-Darling Basin and elsewhere throughout South Australia, throughout Tasmania. Mr Speaker, we do need to build more dams. Mr Speaker, we need to get on with the job of flood mitigation. We need to get on more with the job of storing water for those dry times, Mr Speaker. And I was in the member for Maranoa's electorate just recently, Mr Speaker. We looked at a very good site, Emu Swamp site, Mr Speaker, where potentially we could build a dam. We could build a dam that would increase agriculture, Mr Speaker. And we're getting on with the job. Sunwater is progressing pre-construction activities, Mr Speaker, with the Rookwood Weir, in which the Federal Liberal and Nationals have invested $176.1 million, Mr Speaker. That's in the member for Capricornia's electorate, Mr Speaker, west of Rockhampton, Mr Speaker. It is a tremendous project, Mr Speaker, and we'll start building that during the 2019 dry season, Mr Speaker. $1 billion worth of increased agricultural production. That's what Rookwood Weir will do, $1 billion. But further than that, 2,100 jobs. 2,100 jobs, and the members for Flynn and Capricornia have fought hard for that. They listen to their constituents. More than that, they have delivered. They have delivered. Now, when it comes to the member for Flynn, he listened to his constituents when they talked about the North and South Burnett regions, a feasibility study, and that's why the Liberals and Nationals have invested $2 million in that. It's something that he fought hard for. It's something that he delivered, and it has tremendous local support. The North Burnett Mayor, Rachel Chambers, says, through Ken's hard work, the North and South Burnett will benefit immensely from paddock to plate through the feasibility study. And the Mayor, of course, is absolutely right. Christy Fram, the Chief Executive Officer of the Burnett Inland Economic Development Organisation, she said, congratulations and well done to everyone involved. We can't wait to see these projects progress. And progress they will, thanks to the additional $500 million, $500 million in the National Water Infrastructure Development Fund. That's what we've put on the table, but I'm asked as to what stands in the way. Well, I'm looking at what stands in the way. What stands in the way is those opposite who do not believe in building dams. Those opposite who do not believe in the future drought fund. We've put $3.9 billion on the table to make Australia more resilient when it comes to the next drought. But we get this press release last night from Labor, who, you know, the titles on the press release, quite frankly, are longer than what the words in it. Mr Speaker, not worth the paper it's written on. They don't believe. They do not believe in dams. They do not believe in protecting Australia from future droughts.
Members on both sides. Members on both sides. The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer, and I refer to his responsibility for taxation and administration. Is the Assistant Treasurer aware of reports that failed lobbying firm Shack Communications donated over $100,000 to the Assistant Treasurer's infamous Fadden Forum shortly before going into liquidation, with debts of over $430,000, including to the Tax Office? Has the minister sought advice whether the Tax Office is able to claw back these donations so the revenue can be invested in schools, hospitals and infrastructure instead of the Liberal Party?
Yeah, the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'd put it to you that these are clearly party matters, and in fact ancient party matters, are not in the responsibility of the Minister, the Assistant Treasurer, not now and not at the time that they occurred when he wasn't even a member of the Executive.
The Manager of Opposition Business on the point of order from the Leader of the House.
In the first instance, in terms of the responsibilities of the Assistant Treasurer, the official government statement has him being responsible for both taxation and for administration. The relevance of the question is not because the donation was made to a fund in his electorate. The relevance of the question is because it goes to the return of taxation money to the tax office.
That's plausible.
Yeah, I still think that the question has a series of problems. I appreciate that whoever wrote the question is trying to bend it in a way that would force the minister to reply. Certainly the point the Leader of the House makes with respect to the minister not being in that position at the relevant time is valid. But what I would say, having listened to it as Assistant Treasurer, I think that a minister responsible for the tax office can be questioned on matters of tax administration. I won't go back to earlier examples that involved me as a questioner with a former Assistant Treasurer I'm sort of gazing at, but it doesn't mean that the minister can canvass many of the matters necessarily that have been raised, but I think a question on administration is in order, and how he deals with that question of administration is simply a matter for him.
Mr Speaker, let me thank the member opposite for his question on tax administration. And I, like many members in this House, indeed all members on this side, are more than happy to have a discussion about tax administration and how it's performed. Why don't we start with the government's MAL law, in terms of anti-avoidance law, a series of legislation that those opposite voted against. Well, that series of legislation has now collected $5.6 billion in tax. $5.6 billion for multinationals and large corporations. Furthermore, not only did those opposite vote against that, the government's multinational anti-avoidance legislation has now collected over $1 billion of tax from the large e-commerce providers, the Googles, the Apples, the Amazons. Again, something those opposite voted against. So when it comes to administration of tax, can I suggest that this side of the House has got a great story to tell, and that side of the House who voted against it, a very poor story indeed.
The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the minister update the House on the devastating impact of the recent monsoonal rains have had on graziers in north-west and northern Queensland and their families, and what assistance is government providing to give immediate support to these families in so much desperate need?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the honourable member for his question and interest in these devastating floods. And I visited the areas affected last week and saw the sheer magnitude of an inland sea some 35 kilometres wide. I witnessed stock that was stranded in that inland sea. I witnessed stock that got out of that sea but perished due to the cold weather that came after the monsoon. I was honoured to visit a couple of farmers who had lost everything, had lost all their breeding stock, who had fought to keep those livestock alive during drought, and was the last symbol of their defiance to that drought to see them all gone. And the stoicism of these people, for them to say that there was some poor bugger worse off than them, is something I'll never forget. They are great Australians. And in these times, we come together as Australians, and we come in together in all levels of government, leadership from both the state and federal. And it's proud to say that both the Premier of Queensland and the Prime Minister have agreed to make sure that every adult gets $1,000 within those households, those farming households, and $400 for every child, to make sure they have dignity and respect in making sure that they have bread and butter on the table. But with leadership, the Premier and Prime Minister have also agreed to lift Category C funding from $25,000 to $75,000. That's due to the sheer devastation of the infrastructure that's been impacted by this amount of water. It's also about making sure we look after those communities, those shires, and putting $1 million into those communities to help them rebuild the infrastructure, the key infrastructure, to rebuild those communities' connectivity. But there's also another important aspect to this. It's the mental health. And proudly we're investing $3 million to make sure there's someone there to talk to. The grief that will come in ensuing days and weeks is something that cannot be underestimated. It's important that we act together. It's important when you hear about the euphoria that came with the rains in the initial few days and then the devastation of 3 or 4 more days more that wiped out these people's livelihoods. So you understand the grief that will come. And it's not just confined to the adults. It's also in the lives and the faces of those children. And we heard about Madison and Wyatt Hall, who saw that on their mother's face after she came back and inspected her property and found 800 of her breeders dead. The devastation to that family. Can I say to you, Madison and Wyatt, please, help is on the way. Do not worry. This parliament, this nation, we will help you.
And the member for Hunter on a brief indulgence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just very briefly on indulgence, as has been indicated earlier, nothing invites bipartisanship in this place than the impacts of natural disaster on any part of the Australian community. And of course, I join with the Minister in his expressions of sympathy and concern for all those who have been affected, particularly those in the agriculture sector. And of course, the opposition stands with the government as one and ready to do anything we can to assist those who need help.
I thank the member for Hunter. The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. I refer to his answer to my previous question. Has the minister sought advice whether the Tax Office is able to claw back the donation from Shack Communications?
The Leader of the House has a call.
Mr Speaker, the member for Isaac's question was prefaced with that he referred to the Assistant Treasurer's previous answer, and then the question he asked had absolutely nothing to do with the Assistant Treasurer's previous answer. His previous answer was about tax administration and the tax being paid by multinationals.
The Leader of the House can pause. If everyone can stop interjecting, I'll be able to hear the Leader of the House. Could you just rewind about 10 seconds?
Sure. So the Assistant Treasurer's answer was about the tax being paid by multinationals because, as you pointed out, Mr Speaker, he was required to answer on tax administration, which is his responsibility. The member for Isaacs is now trying to use the Assistant Treasurer's previous answer to ask the question he asked before by prefacing it with, I refer to the Assistant Treasurer's previous answer, which is the usual method of doing so, yet the Assistant Treasurer didn't make mention of any of the subjects covered in the member for Isaacs' question.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
On the point of order, I should have said.
On the point of order, the question that the member for Isaacs asked, while it did refer to the answer to the previous question, didn't rely on that for relevance. It in fact took out the sections of the earlier question that you'd raised an objection to and went specifically to only the issues for which he is responsible as a minister. The Treasury portfolio arrangements make clear where it lists the Assistant Treasurer's responsibility. It has including taxation, legislation and administration.
Okay.
This question goes to the administration of the Tax Office.
I don't need to hear from the Leader of the House. I'm ready to make a ruling. This is an interesting question, the way the member for Isaacs has asked it, because he has used the reference to the previous answer. That, in the past, as the Manager of Opposition Business knows, has opened ministers to questions about words they've said. In this case, by having that as the preamble, I believe rules that question out of order. Let me be blunt. I think if it didn't have that, if it just had the second sentence, it would be in order. But because you're referring to something he said and trying to link that, I don't believe it is in order. I really don't. And I'll say very clearly, the member for Isaacs has asked these questions before, particularly of a former Special Minister of State. So if he looks confused, I'd invite him to look at the Hansard of the text of those questions at that time. We'll go to the next question, and that's the member for Dawson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Human Services. Will the Minister update the House on the steps the government is taking to support those affected by terrible natural disasters, namely bushfires in Tasmania and floods in North Queensland, cities and towns such as Townsville, Groper Creek, Garoo and the North West? With the recent changes that have been made responding to these disasters, I ask what additional services have been made available assisting Australians during this most challenging time?
The Minister for Human Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Dawson for that question. And I acknowledge his hard work on behalf of his community, and during his time as member he's actually had to shepherd his community through several very serious disasters, and he does so with great vigour. As the Minister formerly responsible for Emergency Management Australia, I can tell you that he is a fierce advocate on behalf of his community, and he does a tremendous job. Now, we as a government, as he knows, are committed to helping out Australians when they are impacted by things such as the terrible flooding that we've seen in Queensland and the fires that we've seen in Tasmania that have been discussed extensively in the House today. Now, the impact of those disasters is absolutely devastating on those communities and the families within those communities. My department, the Department of Human Services, plays a key role in delivering support and services when these catastrophic events occur, and I'm very proud of how quickly we've been able to deploy our support services to these affected regions. I directed more than 1,500 staff from my department to answer calls, process claims and provide support to disaster-affected people. Our information line is open every day and getting assistance out the door to people directly affected by these natural disasters. In addition, about 30 staff from my department, including our social workers, have been posted to the evacuation centres to provide information about support to people who have suffered loss from the disaster, including damage to their property and lost income. Now, Mr Speaker, many of the staff from my department have been directly impacted by these disasters. Indeed, I was talking to the Secretary this morning and she reminded me that 20% of the staff in my department have been directly impacted, but that has not stopped them from going to work and supporting their communities. We're also deploying our mobile service centres to assist people in hard-to-reach areas and help them get back to their normal routine. The government's disaster recovery allowance has been activated for Tasmania, and the disaster recovery allowance and disaster recovery payment has been activated for Townsville to provide further support for those families and individuals that have been affected. As of yesterday afternoon, I'm pleased to advise the House that around 35,000 claims for the Australian Government disaster recovery payment have been granted, with more than $42 million already paid into people's bank accounts. More than 130 claims for disaster recovery allowance have been granted, helping people pay their bills, feed their families and get on with their life. Whilst the immediate danger has passed, we will start to move into the long and difficult process of recovery, repair and rebuilding, and I want to reassure everybody in these affected areas that the Australian Government will be there every step of the way. Anyone affected can call the Australian Government Emergency Information Line on 180-2266 and they can complete a claim simply over the phone with absolutely no paperwork to do. We will continue to do all that we can to assist the Queenslanders and Tasmanians affected, and the government will work hand in glove to assist these affected communities.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.